Hey everybody, I'm Mary Love and welcome to Mary Love Country Living. Today I want to read you a Christmas story. Now let me start by saying I did not write this story. From what I can gather, this story has been around since about 2003. I don't know who the author is. I wish I did because I would love to be able to tell them thank you for sharing such a wonderful story that blesses my heart so much. So keep in mind, I am not the author of this story. If maybe after you hear it, if you know who the author is, please leave me a comment and let me know who it is, because I would, if they're still around, I would love to say thank you for such a blessing. But the name of this story is called The Filling Station. The old man sat at his gas station on a cold Christmas Eve. He hadn't been anywhere in years since his wife had passed away. He had no decorations, no tree, no lights. It was just another day to him. He didn't hate Christmas. He just couldn't find a reason to celebrate. There were no children in his life, and his wife had gone. He was sitting there looking at the snow that had been falling for the last hour and wondering what it was all about when the door opened and a homeless man stepped through. Instead of throwing the man out, George, old George, as he was known by his customers, told the man to come and sit by the space heater and warm up. "Thank you, but I don't mean to intrude," said the stranger. "I see you're busy, so I'll just go." "Not without something hot in your belly." George turned and opened a wide-mouthed thermos and handed it to the stranger. "It ain't much, but it's hot and tasty. Stew. Made it myself. When you're done, there's coffee, and it's fresh." Just at that moment, he heard the ding of the driveway bell. "Excuse me." "Be right back," George said. There in the driveway was an old '53 Chevy. Steam was rolling out the front. The driver was panicked. "Mister, can you help me?" said the driver with a deep Spanish accent. "My wife is with child. My car is broken." I know I don't sound like Spanish, but George opened the hood. It was bad. The block looked cracked from the cold. The car was dead. "You ain't going in this thing," George said as he turned away. "But, mister, please help." The door of the office closed behind George as he went in. George went to the office wall and got the keys to his old truck and went back outside. He walked around the building and opened the garage, started the truck, and drove it around to where the couple was waiting. "Here, you can borrow my truck," he said. "She ain't the best thing you ever looked at, but she runs real good." George helped put the woman in the truck and watched as it sped off into the night. George turned and walked back inside the office. "Glad I loaned them my truck. Their tires were shot too. That old truck has brand new tires." George thought he was talking to the stranger, but the man had gone. The thermos was on the desk, empty, with a used coffee cup beside it. "Well, at least he got something in his belly," George thought. George went back outside to see if the old Chevy would start. It cranked slowly, but it started. He pulled it into the garage where the truck had been. He thought he would tinker with it for something to do. Christmas Eve meant no customers. He discovered that the block hadn't cracked. It was just the bottom hose on the radiator. "Well, I can fix this," he said to himself. So he put on a new one. Those tires ain't going to get him through the winter either. He took the snow treads off of his wife's old Lincoln. They were like new, and he wasn't going to drive the car. As he was working, he heard a shot being fired. He ran outside, and beside a police car, an officer lay on the cold ground, bleeding from the left shoulder. The officer moaned, "Help me." George helped the officer inside as he remembered the training he had received in the Army as a medic. He knew the wound needed attention. Pressure to stop the bleeding, he thought. The laundry company had been there that morning and had left clean shop towels. He used those and duct tape to bind the wound. Hey, they say duct tape can fix anything, he said, trying to make the policeman feel at ease. Something for pain, George thought. All he had was the pills he used for his back. These ought to work. He put some water in a cup and gave the policeman the pills. You hang in there. I'm going to get you an ambulance, George said, but the phone was dead. Maybe I can get one of your buddies on that there talk box out in your police car. He went out only to find that a bullet had gone through the dashboard, destroying the two-way radio. He went back in to find the policeman sitting up. Thanks, said the officer. You could have left me there. The guy that shot me is still in the area. George sat down beside him. I would never leave an injured man in the Army, and I ain't gonna leave you. George pulled back the bandage to check for bleeding. Looks worse than what it is. Bullet passed right through you. Good thing it missed the important stuff, though. I think with time, you're gonna be right as rain. George got up and poured a cup of coffee. How do you take it? He asked. None for me, said the officer. Oh, you're gonna drink this. Best in the city. Then George added, Too bad I ain't got no donuts. The officer laughed and winced at the same time. The front door of the office flew open. In burst a young man with a gun. Give me all your cash. Do it now, the young man yelled. His hand was shaking, and George could tell that he had never done anything like this before. That's the guy that shot me, exclaimed the officer. Son, why are you doing this? Asked George. You need to put that cannon away. Somebody else might get hurt. The young man was confused. Shut up, old man, or I'll shoot you too. Now give me the cash. The cop was reaching for his gun. Put that thing away, George said to the cop. We got one too many in here now. He turned his attention to the young man. Son, it's Christmas Eve. If you need the money, well, then here. It ain't much, but it's all I got. Now put that pea shooter away. George pulled $150 out of his pocket and handed it to the young man, reaching for the barrel of the gun at the same time. The young man released his grip on the gun, fell to his knees, and began to cry. I'm not very good at this, am I? All I wanted was to buy something for my wife and son. He went on. I've lost my job. My rent is due. My car got repossessed last week. George handed the gun to the cop. Son, we all get in a bit of a squeeze now and then. The road gets hard sometimes, but we make it through the best we can. He got the young man to his feet and sat him down on a chair across from the cop. Sometimes we do stupid things. George handed the young man a cup of coffee. Being stupid is one of the things that makes us human. Coming in here with the gun ain't the answer. Now sit there and get warm and we'll sort this thing out. The young man had stopped crying. He looked over to the cop. Sorry I shot you. It just went off. I'm sorry, officer. Shut up and drink your coffee, the cop said. George could hear the sounds of sirens outside. A police car and an ambulance skidded to a halt. Two cops came through the door, guns drawn. Chuck, you okay? One of the cops asked the wounded officer. Not bad for a guy who took a bullet. How'd you find me? GPS locator in the car. Best thing since sliced bread. Who did this? The other cop asked as he approached the young man. Chuck answered him. I don't know. The guy ran off into the dark. Just dropped his gun and ran. George and the young man both looked puzzled at each other. Oh, that guy works here, the wounded cop continued. Yep, George said. Just hired him this morning. Boy just lost his job. The paramedics came in and loaded Chuck up onto the stretcher. The young man leaned over the wounded cop and whispered, "Why?" Chuck just said, "Merry Christmas, boy." "And you too, George. And thanks for everything." "Well, looks like you got one doozy of a break there. That ought to solve some of your problems." George went into the back room and came out with a box. He pulled out a ring box. "Here you go. Something for the little woman. I don't think Martha would mind. She said it would come in handy someday." The young man looked inside to see the biggest diamond ring he ever saw. "I can't take this," said the young man. "It means something to you." "And now it means something to you," replied George. "I got my memories. That's all I need." George reached into the box again. A toy airplane, a racing car, and a little metal truck appeared next. They were toys that the oil company had left for him to sell. "Here's something for that little man of yours." The young man began to cry again as he handed back the $150 that the old man had handed him earlier. "And what are you supposed to buy Christmas dinner with?" "You keep that too. Count it as part of your first week's pay," George said. "Now get home to your family." The young man turned with tears streaming down his face. "I'll be here in the morning for work, if that job offer is still good." "Nope, I'm closed Christmas Day," George said. "See you the day after." George turned around to find the stranger had returned. "Where'd you come from? I thought you left." "I have been here. I have always been here," said the stranger. "You say you don't celebrate Christmas. Why?" "Well, after my wife passed away, I just couldn't see what all the bother was. Putting up a tree and all seemed a waste of a good pine tree. Baking cookies like I used to with Martha just wasn't the same by myself. And besides, I was getting a little chubby." The stranger put his hand on George's shoulder. "But you do celebrate the holiday, George. You gave me food and drink and warmed me when I was cold and hungry. The woman with child will bear a son, and he will become a great doctor. The policeman you helped will go on to save 19 people from being killed by terrorists. The young man who tried to rob you will become a rich man and share his wealth with many people. That is the spirit of the season, and you keep it as good as any man." George was taken aback by all the stranger had said. "And how do you know all this?" asked the old man. "Trust me, George, I have the inside track on this sort of thing. And when your days are done, you'll be with Martha again." The stranger moved toward the door. "If you'll excuse me, George, I have to go now. I have to go home where there's a big celebration planned." George watched as the old man's leather jacket and his torn pants turned into a white robe. A golden light began to fill the room. "You see, George, it's my birthday. Merry Christmas." Whew. If you take nothing else from this story, just know that it's not about the presents that are under the tree, but the presents that hung on that tree. God shed his blood for you and me, just the same. He loves us. He was willing to sacrifice his only son so that we would have a way to get to him. I pray that you have a wonderful Christmas and that you remember what the reason for this season is all about. I pray blessings upon each and every one of y'all. But with that, I'm going to say good afternoon. God bless. Take care. And I hope you have a fantastic week. But until then, I'll catch y'all on the flip side. Bye now.